what is it about Shostakovich? This famously twitchy, nearsighted Russian composer whose life spanned almost the entire Soviet era, from before the 1917 revolution through deep into the Cold War in the mid-1970s. His music is multifaceted and reflects the complexity and uncertainty of a world that had rapidly mechanized and became increasingly brutal in a relatively short period of time. Perhaps these are some of the reasons why his music still fascinates and has such a magnetic appeal. There aren't many 20th century composers who have a group of followers as devoted as Shostakovich's. But what you might find most surprising is that one of the reasons for this level of devotion has to do with when people are typically exposed to his music. So whether you're already a fellow Dmitri devotee or have yet to discover the maestro of mood swings and the musical spokesperson of the modern era, stick around. This hot take has been 35 years in the making. My name's David, and I'm a classically trained musician turned happy amateur who just can't quit music. For those of you asking, Shosta, who the vitch are you talking about? Well, I'll tell you. Dmitri Shostakovich was born in St. Petersburg in 1906. He was a textbook child prodigy who was accepted into the Leningrad Conservatory in 1919 at the tender age of 13. 6 years later, in 1926, his diploma piece, the First Symphony, was premiered by the Leningrad Philharmonic, bringing him instant notoriety as a 19-year-old wunderkind and thrusting him into the spotlight, where he would remain for the rest of his life. Shostakovich's sound and style were shaped by an early gig as a pianist in Leningrad's popular silent movie houses. That First Symphony that made him famous has an uncanny cinematic quality, which once you hear it, you'll notice it in many of his subsequent works. His compositions bristle with encrypted political commentary, dark humor, and cynicism, reflecting his fraught relationship with Soviet authorities, particularly Stalin. His career could be accurately described as a game of cat and mouse. For nearly 40 years, he pulled off an astonishing balancing act, repeatedly teetering between condemnation when he overstepped and accolades when he delivered the goods for the propagandists. In the West, he was championed by celebrity mid-century US conductors like Leopold Stokowski and Lenny Bernstein, whom Shostakovich especially adored.
I would like most humbly and respectfully to welcome to this audience Mr. Shostakovich himself, and I would like to thank him personally and in the name of my country for the wonderful music he has given us.
Western audiences were spellbound by his ability to express universal human emotions through music that was both complex and accessible. Shostakovich wrote 15 symphonies and 15 string quartets, alongside concerti for piano, violin, and cello, works that remain pillars of the repertoire. He's also considered the last great symphonist, but was also a lifelong student of Bach and composed his own set of 24 preludes and fugues for the piano to commemorate the 200th anniversary of Bach's death in 1950. He was the 20th century master of the Passacaglia, a Baroque form underpinned by a usually serious, furrowed brow ostinato in the bass. Truly some of the most astonishingly beautiful cries for help ever written. Though in very poor health for his last several years, he was a lifelong heavy smoker and diagnosed with lung cancer in 1973, Shostakovich continued to compose until just weeks before his death. His final work, a sonata for viola and piano, was sent for copying on July 5th, 1975, shortly after which he was hospitalized and passed away on August 9th of the same year. So you'd think that being obsessed with this 20th century Russian composer would be rare for teenagers, right? Think again. I had only to lightly scrape through comments on Shostakovich performances on YouTube to discover that I wasn't the only Shosta-Kid. Here's how it went down for me. There were really just a handful of us, band and orchestra nerds, and we all discovered Shostakovich at the same time in the same way. So I'm a Texas boy, and in 1988, the Texas All-State Music Program released their call for auditions with none other than Shostakovich's Fifth Symphony on the program. Only high school juniors and seniors were eligible to audition, so as a sophomore, I wasn't eligible, but my brother and many of my orchestra nerd friends were. Everyone's initial reaction was, Shosta who? Nobody knew anything from Shostakovich, and according to my brother, when the audition excerpts were passed out, the prevailing sentiment was a collective what the F. Their parts sounded weird. And then the grumbling started, like, why are we playing this shit? Of course, a recording was nowhere to be found in pre-internet 1988 until someone finally tracked down a cassette tape, which then got extensively copied and passed around. We wanted to hate it, we really did. And then everyone gradually started to come around. And next thing you knew, everyone loved Shostakovich. In that little circle of competitive 15 to 18-year-olds, all of us were somehow listening obsessively to this 4-movement, 50-minute symphony written by a composer we'd only heard about last week, on repeat. And then the practicing. Fiendish practicing. So my brother and a few of my friends eventually won their auditions and performed it at the All-State Convention in Austin, which was a transforming experience for them, but it was easily as transformative for me, and I was just an onlooker. If you've ever felt like certain music just gets programmed into your brain at just the right time, well, it might not be an accident. So I did a little bit of digging through the performance archives of the Texas Music Educators Association, TMEA, and do you know what I found? Since 1951, the only composer whose music was performed more frequently than Shostakovich is... Tchaikovsky. Tchaikovsky was programmed 39 times, but Shostakovich is close behind at 35. Beethoven is a distant third at just 17 performances. Of the other great symphonists, you have Mahler at 12, Brahms at 10, Stravinsky at 8, Prokofiev at 7, and then Bruckner at just 1 performance. When these are the programming choices for a program aimed at 16 to 18-year-olds, what does that tell you? First of all, it tells you that the very wise music educators leading the TMEA know that making students in this age group practice Bruckner would bring about quite possibly the end of Western classical music as we know it. I know I'm going to get it from the Bruckner people, but it's true. More pertinently, it shows you that they also know that the music written by Tchaikovsky and Shostakovich seems to captivate and hook students in this age group. That's been my lived experience, but I am curious. If anyone out there worked with the TMEA back in the day, I would love to hear if it is, in fact, a conspiracy, or rather, deliberate. But so then the question is, why? Why are music nerds, and in particular teenage music nerds, so susceptible to Shostakovich? I think it's a combination of a few factors. There's a stark contrast with the music that most young music students study between the ages of 10 and 15. Like, if you're a pianist, or a string player, there's usually lots of Mozart in this age group, and of course some Bach and Vivaldi. For pianists specifically, you have Clementi and Beethoven's student sonatas. All fine music, but not necessarily enough to keep the developing teenage brain interested. And the music being studied has to evolve with the student. That's where Shostakovich comes in. He offers the breadth of emotional range that matches the roller coaster of the average teenager's moods. Beethoven also works. I'll never forget how obsessed I was with the Appassionata Sonata. But where I think Shostakovich edges out both Tchaikovsky and Beethoven has to do with recency. Being closer to the present day than the other two, Shostakovich had more tools to innovate with, plus direct inspiration from Russian trailblazers Stravinsky and Mussorgsky. And more reasons to write music that is often raw and to the uninitiated ear, ugly. What so many of my non-classical nerd friends were listening to in the late 80s and early 90s was also raw and ugly music. Nirvana, Depeche Mode, Smashing Pumpkins, Beastie Boys. I was never a fan, because even then I was a pure classical nerd. But what Smells Like Teen Spirit was to so many, Shostakovich's Eighth Quartet was to me. This is classical headbanger music, and we couldn't get enough of it. Adding to Shostakovich's cool factor is the fact that he is one of only two composers in the entire canon who managed to create and convincingly use a musical signature. The other was Bach, obviously. Shostakovich used the letters DSCH. The initial of his first name, and the first letters of his surname as written in German to create his signature. German note names are needed for these to work. H represents B natural, and S, or E flat, is what Shostakovich used for his S. I think it's no coincidence that the works where Shostakovich's musical signature is central are some of the pieces that are most popular with the Shosta-Kids. I mean, once you discover this little factoid about Shostakovich, you're naturally driven to Quartet number 8, where it's the central motif of the entire work. And then Symphony number 10, where it repeatedly smacks you across the forehead with all the subtlety of an iron skillet. If you're a Shosta-Kid, or a Shosta-adult for that matter, I want to hear from you. How he came into your life, your favorite pieces, and even, or especially the pieces that you don't really like so much. One of my favorite things about this channel is dialogue with you, so please leave a comment below. See you next time. Ciao.